Proud Crow Chief finds a white woman feeding his starving child, an encounter that will test everything he believes about trust, honor, and survival. What happens next will change both of their worlds forever. Thank you so much for watching, and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The harsh winter had settled over the Montana territory like a merciless predator, sinking its teeth into the Absaroka people. Chief Running Wolf of the Mountain Crow stood at the entrance of his teepee, his weathered face turned toward the distant mountains that had once promised abundance, but now seemed to mock his tribe's suffering. The year was 1878, and the changes that had swept across the plains had left his people vulnerable in ways they had never known before. "Father," a small voice called from behind him. Running Wolf turned to see his 7-year-old son, Little Hawk, his cheeks hollow and eyes large in his gaunt face. The boy had been strong once, racing across the plains and practicing with a small bow his father had crafted. Now he moved slowly, conserving what little energy remained in his thin frame. "What is it, my son?" Running Wolf knelt, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "When will we hunt again?" Little Hawk asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Running Wolf felt the familiar ache in his chest. How could he explain to his child that the great buffalo herds that had sustained their people for generations were gone? White hunters had slaughtered them by the thousands, leaving only bones scattered across the prairie. The Crow had been pushed onto smaller and smaller parcels of land, and the game they relied upon had disappeared. "Soon," he lied, forcing confidence into his voice. "The spirits will bring the animals back when the snow melts." His wife, Morning Star, emerged from the teepee, her once beautiful face now etched with worry lines. She had been a vibrant woman whose laughter echoed through their camp. Now she moved with deliberate care, rationing her strength just as they rationed their dwindling food supplies. "The last of the dried meat is gone," she said quietly so Little Hawk couldn't hear. "The others have nothing left to share." Running Wolf nodded, his jaw tight. Pride had once been his companion, but now necessity guided his decisions. "I will go to the white settlement tomorrow. Perhaps they will honor the treaty provisions this time." Morning Star's eyes reflected her doubt, but she didn't speak it aloud. They both knew the government agents often withheld the promised rations or delivered spoiled food that made their people sick. That night, as the bitter wind howled outside their teepee, Running Wolf watched his son sleep fitfully, his small body curled tightly against the cold. Beside him, Morning Star had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her breathing shallow but steady. Running Wolf moved to the center of the teepee and knelt by the small fire. He took a pouch from around his neck, a medicine bundle passed down from his grandfather. Inside were sacred objects: an eagle feather, a small piece of buffalo hide from before the great slaughter, and herbs gathered from the mountains. He conducted his prayers in silence, asking the ancestors for guidance, for strength, for a way to save his people. A vision came to him as he closed his eyes, not of the glorious past when the Absaroka rode freely across the plains, but of something unexpected: a woman with hair the color of wheat fields and eyes like the summer sky. She stood at a crossroads, holding something in her hands. Food? Medicine? Running Wolf couldn't see clearly, but he felt a strange certainty that this woman would be significant. Dawn brought no relief from hunger or cold, but Running Wolf rose with determination. He dressed in his warmest buckskins and wrapped his blanket tightly around his shoulders. "Where are you going?" Morning Star asked, stirring from her sleep. "To the white settlement," he replied, securing his knife at his belt. "I will not return empty-handed." The journey to Fort Keogh was arduous in the deep snow. Running Wolf's stomach cramped with hunger, but he pushed forward, thinking only of Little Hawk's thin face and Morning Star's worried eyes. The other families in their small band were suffering equally. 2 Bears had lost his youngest daughter to illness just a week before, and Old Woman Walking had grown so weak she could barely leave her teepee. When he finally reached the outskirts of the settlement, Running Wolf paused, observing the wooden buildings and the smoke rising from chimneys. The smell of cooking food drifted on the air, making his empty stomach clench painfully. He straightened his back, summoning the dignity befitting a Crow chief, and proceeded toward the Indian Agency building. He never made it there. As he passed a small cabin set apart from the others, Running Wolf saw a flash of golden hair in the window. The woman from his vision. He stopped, watching as she moved about inside her home. Then the door opened, and she stepped out, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. She looked up and saw him standing there, their eyes meeting across the snowy yard. For a moment, neither moved. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. A tentative gesture, but genuine. Running Wolf felt something shift in the cold air between them. Whether it was threat or promise, he couldn't yet tell. But he knew with certainty that this encounter would change everything. Rebecca Miller had come west with dreams as vast as the Montana sky. A widow at 26, she had left behind the suffocating sympathy of Cincinnati society and her parents' insistence that she remarry quickly. The frontier represented freedom, a place to build a new life on her own terms. What she hadn't anticipated was the isolation, the bitter cold of winter, and the complexity of living on the edge of two colliding worlds. She had arrived at Fort Keogh 6 months earlier, using the modest inheritance from her late husband to purchase a small cabin and establish herself as a seamstress and laundress. The soldiers at the fort and the handful of settler families provided enough work to sustain her, though barely. Rebecca had heard plenty of stories about the savage Indians from the other settlers, tales designed to frighten and warn. But she had also witnessed the Crow people when they came to the fort, dignified despite their increasingly desperate circumstances, maintaining a quiet pride even as they negotiated for the rations promised by treaties that were routinely broken. When she saw the tall native man standing outside her cabin that morning, Rebecca's first instinct was fear. But something in his bearing, the straight shoulders despite his obvious hunger, the direct gaze that held no threat but rather a weary dignity, made her pause. She recognized him as one of the Crow chiefs who had come to the Indian Agency several times over the autumn months. Rebecca stepped forward, clutching her basket. "Good morning," she said, though she knew he likely didn't understand English. Running Wolf studied the white woman. He had learned enough English from the traders and government agents to communicate basic needs, though he found the language abrupt and lacking in nuance. "Morning," he responded with a slight nod. Rebecca's eyes widened in surprise. "You speak English?" "Some words," Running Wolf said. "Need food. For my people. For my son." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before making a decision that would alter both their lives. "Wait here," she said, turning back to her cabin. Inside, she added more cornbread to her basket and grabbed a small sack of beans and another of flour. It was more than she could really spare, but something about the man's quiet dignity moved her. When she returned, Running Wolf was still standing where she'd left him, his dark eyes watchful. "Here," she said, offering the basket. "It's not much, but it might help." Running Wolf looked at the basket, conflicted. His people needed food desperately, but accepting charity from a white woman felt like another surrender, another acknowledgement of how far the mighty Crow had fallen. "Why?" he asked. Rebecca considered her answer carefully. "Because I have some to share," she said simply, "and because no one should go hungry if others have food." After a moment, Running Wolf accepted the basket with a nod of thanks. "I am Running Wolf, Chief of Mountain Crow," he said formally. "I'm Rebecca Miller," she replied with a small smile. "Please come back if you need more. I can't offer much, but what I have, I'll share." As Running Wolf turned to leave, a commotion erupted from the direction of the fort. 3 soldiers on horseback approached rapidly, their expressions hardening when they spotted Running Wolf. "Ma'am, step away from that Indian," called the lead soldier, his hand moving to his pistol. Rebecca straightened her spine and stepped forward instead. "This man is my guest, Sergeant Harper," she said firmly. "He was just leaving with some supplies I've given him." "Mrs. Miller, you shouldn't be out here alone with a savage," Harper said, dismounting and approaching. "There have been reports of Indians stealing livestock from the Henderson place." "Chief Running Wolf is neither stealing nor threatening me," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I'll thank you to remember that the Crow are allies of the army, not enemies." The sergeant looked skeptical but didn't draw his weapon. "The colonel won't like hearing about you providing supplies to Indians without going through proper channels," he warned. "There are rules about this sort of thing." "Then the colonel is welcome to discuss it with me," Rebecca said, lifting her chin. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I was just finishing my business with Chief Running Wolf." Running Wolf watched this exchange with interest. The woman's courage surprised him. Few whites would stand between a soldier and an Indian. He nodded respectfully to Rebecca. "I go now," he said. "Thank you for food." As Running Wolf walked away, he heard the sergeant admonishing Rebecca, but her voice remained firm. She was either very brave or very foolish, he thought. Perhaps both. The journey back to his people's camp seemed faster despite the added weight of the food basket. When Running Wolf arrived, several children spotted him and called out excitedly upon seeing the basket. Little Hawk emerged from their teepee, his eyes brightening at the sight of his father. "You brought food," he exclaimed, rushing forward. Morning Star appeared behind their son, relief washing over her features. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly as they entered their teepee. Running Wolf described his encounter with Rebecca as they divided the cornbread and beans, some for their family, but portions for the elders and the other families with small children as well. It wasn't much, but it would keep starvation at bay for another day or two. "A white woman helped you?" Morning Star asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "Yes," Running Wolf replied, thinking of Rebecca's steady gaze. "She is different from the others. Can you trust her?" Morning Star's question reflected the wariness that years of broken promises had instilled in their people. Running Wolf considered this. "I don't know," he answered honestly. But today, she gave food when others would not. That night, as his family slept with fuller bellies than they had known in weeks, Running Wolf stepped outside the teepee and looked toward the distant lights of the fort. The white woman's face appeared in his mind. Her direct gaze, her unexpected kindness. A dangerous hope began to form in his heart, one he dared not fully acknowledge even to himself. Perhaps there was still a path forward for his people, one that didn't end in starvation or war. Little did he know that at that same moment, Rebecca Miller sat by her cabin window, looking out toward the plains where the Crow people camped, wondering about the proud chief and his hungry son, and feeling the first stirrings of a purpose that would soon consume her life. The following days brought a temporary thaw, both in the weather and in the rigid boundaries that had separated Rebecca's world from Running Wolf's. 3 days after their first encounter, Rebecca was startled by a soft knock at her cabin door. She opened it to find Running Wolf standing there, this time with a small boy at his side. The child was thin but had the same proud bearing as his father, his dark eyes curious as he regarded Rebecca. "This is my son, Little Hawk," Running Wolf said. "I bring payment for your kindness." From beneath his blanket he produced a beautifully crafted leather pouch, decorated with intricate beadwork in blue and white patterns. Rebecca shook her head. "No payment is necessary," she insisted. Running Wolf's expression remained serious. "Absaroka do not take charity. We trade. We give back." He held out the pouch again. "Made by Morning Star, my wife." Understanding the importance of this gesture, Rebecca accepted the gift with both hands. "It's beautiful. Please thank Morning Star for me." She turned to Little Hawk and smiled. "Would you both come in? I've just made some stew." Running Wolf hesitated, then nodded. For a short time. Inside the cabin, Little Hawk's eyes widened at the sight of Rebecca's small but comfortable home. Books lined a crude shelf, colorful quilts brightened the bed in the corner, and a small stove radiated warmth. Rebecca ladled stew into bowls and placed them on her table along with fresh bread. "Please eat," she invited. Little Hawk looked to his father, who nodded permission. The boy began eating carefully at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as the rich flavors filled his mouth. Running Wolf ate more slowly, maintaining his dignity despite his hunger. Rebecca seated herself across from them. "How many people are in your camp?" she asked. Running Wolf studied her, wondering at her intentions. Finally he answered, 32, 12 children, 8 elders. Others gone to different bands or... He didn't complete the sentence, but Rebecca understood. Or dead from starvation, disease, or conflict. "The government is supposed to provide rations," Rebecca said, anger edging her voice. "It's in the treaties." "Treaties mean nothing to white government," Running Wolf replied matter-of-factly. "Agents keep food for themselves or sell it. What they give is not enough or is rotten." Rebecca had heard rumors of corruption at the Indian Agency, but hearing it confirmed so directly made her stomach clench with anger and shame. "That's wrong," she said simply. Running Wolf shrugged slightly. It is the way things are now. Once, Absaroka were strong. We hunted buffalo, made our own way. Now buffalo gone, hunting grounds taken. Little Hawk had been listening quietly. Father is teaching me to hunt like in the old days, he piped up proudly. When I am bigger, I will hunt for our people. Rebecca smiled at the boy's determination. I'm sure you'll be an excellent hunter. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Running Wolf tensed, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. It's probably just Sergeant Harper making his rounds, Rebecca said, though she moved to the window with concern. Looking out, her heart sank. It's Colonel Forsyth and Lieutenant Warren. We go, Running Wolf said immediately, guiding Little Hawk toward the back door. Wait, Rebecca said, quickly gathering food into a sack. Take this, and please come back in 2 days. I'll have more ready. Running Wolf accepted the sack with a nod. Then he and Little Hawk slipped out the back door just as a knock sounded at the front. Rebecca took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and opened the door with a forced smile. Colonel Forsyth, Lieutenant Warren. What a surprise. Colonel Forsyth, a stern-faced man with a meticulously groomed mustache, didn't return her smile. Mrs. Miller, I understand you've been providing supplies to Indians without authorization. I wasn't aware I needed authorization to be charitable, Colonel, Rebecca replied evenly. This isn't about charity, ma'am, Lieutenant Warren interjected. It's about security and proper procedures. All interactions with the natives should go through the Indian Agency. The same Indian Agency that's failing to provide the rations guaranteed by treaty? Rebecca challenged. Colonel Forsyth's expression hardened. Mrs. Miller, you're new to the frontier. There are complexities you don't understand. The Indian situation is delicate. What I understand, Colonel, is that there are hungry children in that camp, Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Children who aren't being fed despite our government's promises. Your concern is admirable if misguided, Forsyth said condescendingly, but individual actions like yours undermine the system we've established. A system that's letting people starve? The Colonel's patience was clearly wearing thin. Mrs. Miller, I'm not here to debate Indian policy with you. I'm here to inform you that providing supplies directly to Indians without proper authorization must stop, for your own safety and for the maintenance of order. Rebecca felt her cheeks flush with anger. And if I choose to continue sharing my own food with whomever I please, then we would have to reconsider whether Fort Keogh can continue providing you with protection, Forsyth replied coolly. The frontier is a dangerous place for a woman alone. The threat was thinly veiled, and Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Is that all, Colonel? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. For now, yes. Forsyth turned to leave but paused. I hope you'll reconsider your position, Mrs. Miller. Good day. After they left, Rebecca sank into a chair, her hands shaking. The Colonel's warning had been clear, but so had the hunger in Little Hawk's eyes. She thought of Running Wolf's quiet dignity in the face of his people's suffering, and her resolve strengthened. She couldn't abandon them now. Meanwhile, Running Wolf and Little Hawk made their way back to camp, the sack of food clutched tightly. As they walked, Little Hawk looked up at his father. The white woman is kind, he said simply. Running Wolf nodded. Yes, but not all whites are like her. Why do they not want her to help us? Running Wolf considered how to explain the complexities of the situation to his young son. The white leaders want our people to depend only on them, he finally said. It gives them power over us. Little Hawk digested this, but she is not afraid of them. No, Running Wolf agreed, thinking of Rebecca standing up to the soldiers. She is brave, like a Crow woman. When they returned to camp, Morning Star was waiting anxiously. Her eyes widened at the sight of the food sack, and she hurried forward to greet them. What happened? She asked as they entered their teepee. Running Wolf explained their visit to Rebecca's cabin and the arrival of the soldiers. Morning Star listened intently, her expression troubled. This woman takes great risk to help us, she said. The white authorities will not look kindly on her actions. She knows this, Running Wolf replied. Yet she still chooses to help. Morning Star began dividing the food, setting aside portions for the elders and the families with the youngest children. Why would she do this? She wondered aloud. What does she gain? Running Wolf had been asking himself the same question. I believe she acts from her heart, he said finally. Not all whites think alike, just as not all Absaroka think alike. Later that evening, as the small fire in their teepee provided modest warmth against the returning cold, Running Wolf held a council with the other men of their band. Two Bears, once a renowned warrior whose strength had been sapped by hunger, listened intently to Running Wolf's account of Rebecca Miller. "Can we trust this white woman?" he asked, voicing the concern foremost in everyone's mind. "I believe we can," Running Wolf replied. "But the fort commander has threatened her. She may not be able to continue helping us." Old Man Walking Alone, the eldest of their group, spoke up, his voice cracking with age. "In my life, I have seen much change, most of it bad for our people. But sometimes the Great Spirit sends unexpected allies. What should we do?" asked young Elk, one of the younger men. Running Wolf stared into the fire, thinking of Rebecca's determined face and Little Hawk's hopeful eyes. "We will go to her again as she asked," he decided. "But we must be careful not to bring trouble to her door. And we must find our own solutions as well. We cannot depend solely on one white woman's kindness." As the council ended, Running Wolf stepped outside the teepee. The night was clear, stars blazing across the vast Montana sky. In 2 days he would return to Rebecca's cabin, bringing more of his people's crafts to trade for food. It was a temporary solution, but it gave them time to survive the winter, time to find a better path forward. What he didn't yet realize was that Rebecca Miller was already formulating a plan of her own, one that would challenge the corrupt systems at Fort Keogh and potentially change the fate of his people. As the cold wind swept across the plains, two worlds that had been separated by prejudice, fear, and history were slowly, inexorably beginning to connect. The late February dawn broke with a deceptive mildness that suggested spring's approach, though Running Wolf knew better than to trust the weather's temporary mercy. 2 weeks had passed since his first encounter with Rebecca Miller, and in that time a careful alliance had formed. Twice more he had visited her cabin with Little Hawk, exchanging their people's craftwork for food and supplies that she had begun collecting not only from her own stores, but from sympathetic women in the settlement. Today's visit would be different. Running Wolf had learned through hushed conversations with Two Bear's cousin, who worked occasionally at the fort, that Colonel Forsyth was planning to conduct an inspection of Rebecca's cabin. The authorities suspected she was continuing to aid the Crow despite their warnings. Running Wolf approached the cabin cautiously, scanning the surroundings before making his presence known. Rebecca opened the door quickly at his soft knock, her face lined with worry. "I can't talk long," she said, ushering him inside. "Colonel Forsyth is coming today. I've been warned by Mrs. Campbell from the general store." "I know," Running Wolf replied. "I came to warn you also." Rebecca looked surprised, then smiled slightly. "It seems we both have our sources of information." She moved to her table, which was covered with parcels wrapped in cloth and paper. "I've been gathering evidence," she explained, showing him letters, receipts, and a small journal. "The Indian agent, Mr. Harrison, has been selling government rations meant for your people and pocketing the money. I've tracked shipments that arrived but never reached your camp." Running Wolf looked at the documents, recognizing the significance of what she had uncovered, though he couldn't read the English words. "This is dangerous knowledge," he said. Rebecca nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Yes, but it's also powerful. I have a friend in Helena who works for a newspaper, and another acquaintance who has connections to officials in Washington. I've written to both. The fort commander will not allow you to send these letters," Running Wolf pointed out. "He doesn't know about them," Rebecca replied with a flash of triumph in her eyes. "The stage driver has been carrying them for me privately." Running Wolf studied this remarkable woman who had risked so much for people she barely knew. "Why do you do this?" he finally asked. "Why help Absaroka when your own people threaten you?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, arranging the papers carefully. "When my husband died 3 years ago, I was left alone. My parents wanted me to remarry quickly, to become someone's wife again as though that was all I could be." She looked up at Running Wolf. "I came west to find independence, to make my own choices. When I saw you that first day, so proud despite your people's suffering, I recognized something in you. The same desire for freedom, for dignity. She continued gathering the documents. The way your people are being treated is wrong. I can't change everything, but I can't stand by and do nothing either. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Rebecca quickly handed Running Wolf a sack of supplies. "Take this and go out the back," she urged. "Come back in 3 days. Hopefully I'll have news by then." Running Wolf accepted the sack but hesitated. "You take great risk for my people." "Some things are worth the risk," Rebecca replied simply. With a respectful nod, Running Wolf slipped out the back door just as a sharp knock sounded at the front. The next 3 days were among the longest of Running Wolf's life. A spring storm had settled over the plains, bringing not the gentle renewal of the season, but a harsh reminder of winter's lingering power. In the Crow camp, food from Rebecca's last delivery was carefully rationed, but the harsh weather prevented hunting or foraging to supplement their meager stores. Little Hawk had fallen ill with a fever, and Morning Star tended to him anxiously. Running Wolf sat beside his son, placing a cool cloth on his forehead as the boy tossed restlessly. "Will the kind white woman come to help us?" Little Hawk asked, his voice weak. "She cannot come to our camp," Running Wolf explained gently, "but I will go to her again soon." Morning Star looked up from where she was preparing a medicinal tea. "If the soldier chief has arrested her, what will we do then?" she asked quietly. Running Wolf had been asking himself the same question. "Then we will find another way," he said with more confidence than he felt. "Our people have survived many challenges." When the appointed day arrived, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Running Wolf made his way toward Rebecca's cabin with a mixture of hope and dread. As he approached, he saw smoke rising from the chimney, a good sign that she was still there. Rebecca opened the door before he could knock, her face alight with excitement. "I have news," she said, pulling him inside. The cabin was warm and smelled of fresh bread. On the table lay a newspaper and several official-looking letters. "The newspaper in Helena published my evidence," Rebecca explained, showing him the paper where a headline declared, "Corruption at Fort Keogh Indian Agency Exposed." "And this," she continued, holding up a letter, "is from a senator in Washington. He's ordered an investigation into the Indian Agency here. Agent Harrison has already been relieved of his duties." Running Wolf took in this news cautiously. "Will this bring food to my people?" "Better than that," Rebecca smiled. "Look," she pointed to another letter. "The new agent will arrive next week and he's bringing the full allotment of rations that were supposed to be delivered over the winter. And this," she held up a final document, "is permission for me to serve as a liaison between the fort and your people until the new arrangements are settled." "The fort commander allowed this?" Running Wolf asked skeptically. Rebecca's smile turned wry. Colonel Forsyth had little choice. Once the corruption was exposed, he needed to show he was part of the solution, not the problem. He's suddenly very supportive of improved relations with our Crow allies. For the first time in months, Running Wolf felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His people would eat. Little Hawk would recover. They had survived another winter. "There's something else," Rebecca said, her expression growing more serious. "I've been offered a position as a teacher at the fort." Running Wolf nodded, understanding the opportunity this represented for her. "But I've made a counter-proposal," she continued. "I want to establish a school that would serve both the fort children and the Crow children, a place where both cultures could be respected and shared." Running Wolf considered this carefully. Education in the white man's ways could benefit his people, helping them navigate the changing world. But he had heard stories of Indian schools where children were punished for speaking their language or practicing their traditions. "Our children would learn English and your numbers," he said, "but they would also keep their Absaroka ways? Their language?" "Yes," Rebecca affirmed. "That's exactly what I proposed. Not to replace one culture with another, but to create understanding between them. The children would learn from each other." Running Wolf was silent for a long moment, weighing the possibilities. "I must discuss this with my council," he finally said. "Such a decision affects all our people." "Of course," Rebecca agreed. "But first let me send food for your son. Mrs. Campbell told me he's been ill." Running Wolf was surprised. "How did she know this?" Rebecca smiled. "You're not the only one with sources of information. The women at the fort have been watching, listening. Many of them want to help, but were afraid to go against the colonel." As Rebecca packed a basket with bread, dried fruits, and medicines for Little Hawk, Running Wolf reflected on how much had changed since that first desperate day when he'd stood outside her cabin. One person's courage had inspired others. One small act of kindness had grown into something much larger. When he returned to camp that afternoon, Running Wolf brought not just food, but also hope. The council meeting lasted well into the evening, with spirited debate about Rebecca's school proposal. Some, like Two Bears, were skeptical, fearing another broken promise. Others saw opportunity in the partnership. In the end, Old Man Walking Alone spoke words that swayed the council. "Our old ways are precious," he said, his voice cracking with age and emotion. "But our children need new skills to survive in the world that is coming. If this woman offers a bridge between worlds, we should consider crossing it." Spring arrived in earnest the following week, bringing new life to the plains. Little Hawk recovered from his illness and regained his strength as the promised rations finally arrived at the Crow camp. Rebecca visited officially as the fort's liaison, accompanied by the new Indian agent, a solemn man who seemed genuinely committed to honoring the treaty obligations. On a warm day in early April, Rebecca stood with Running Wolf on a hill overlooking both the fort and the Crow camp. Below them, something remarkable was happening. Little Hawk was playing with two children from the fort, their laughter carrying on the breeze as they taught each other games from their respective cultures. "Your school idea has already begun," Running Wolf observed, nodding toward the children. Rebecca smiled. "Children find it easier to bridge differences than adults do. And some adults are wiser than others," Running Wolf replied, looking at her with respect. The breeze carried the scent of prairie grass and new beginnings. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to the changes unfolding on the plains below. "What will you do now?" Rebecca asked. "Now that your people have enough food again?" Running Wolf watched his son playing with the other children, his heart full of cautious hope. "We will rebuild," he said simply, "and we will remember who stood with us when others would not." Rebecca turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the same mixture of determination and hope that had drawn them together that first day. "I'll be here," she promised. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the land they both loved for different reasons, Running Wolf and Rebecca made their way down the hill toward the playing children. Behind them, their separate paths converged into a single trail leading toward a future neither could have imagined alone. A future where understanding might grow from the seeds of compassion, where two worlds might find a way to exist side by side with dignity and respect. And though challenges would surely come again, as they always did on the frontier, the bond forged between Running Wolf's people and Rebecca Miller during that harsh winter would endure, a testament to the power of human connection across the boundaries of culture and circumstance. It was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one written together, with courage, wisdom, and hope.